All right, I think I'm live now. I don't know. I got to go inspect my YouTube channel. Here we go. All right, I think we're ready to rock and roll. How's everyone doing today? Go to my comment section. Whew, it's Friday. It's Friday. I am excited because it is the weekend, but at the same time, I still got to write a ton of CFPs. I've got KubeCon that I've got to finish up. I've got some of the Colo events. And something else too, I forgot. I'm gonna turn off the music because it's starting to bug me back here. Yeah, so there's KubeCon, Colo events, and Rejekts as well. Hey, Sedant, how are you doing? Welcome, welcome. I am. I'm just trying to see if everything's showing up here. Ooh, interesting. So LinkedIn is not properly showing. It's working on LinkedIn. All right, that's good. Hello, Rakesh. Welcome. Hi, Gaurish. Welcome as well. Now, the funny thing is, I cannot get comments to show up on my StreamYard. So this is going to be a little bit fun. But anyways, you know, you're probably here because you're trying to figure out how to write a CFP, especially since KubeCon CFPs are due Sunday at 5:59 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. If you're in Europe, that's closer to 11:59, somewhere around there. And it's usually closing because it's usually around the Paris time, or the time zone. So you've got a bit of time left. You've got roughly 2 days, 2 days to really figure stuff out. Really think about a topic. I mean, if you really want to be aggressive, you could probably pump one out very soon. I see on my StreamYard random LinkedIn user, which is interesting. Hello, Rajesh Kumar. Welcome. Now, when it comes to CFPs, right? I mean, you're thinking about a conference. You're thinking about a conference that you're trying to submit a talk to, and it always starts with an idea, some kind of idea. Now, what that idea might be, it could be anything. I mean, it could be as simple as, hey, I want to tell people a little bit about how we make containers, multi-stage, multi-layered containers or something with Docker and Docker Compose or whatever you want to think about. Now, that might be your topic, right? And the consideration is, do you want to submit a topic and just say, hey, I'm going to talk about Docker and containers and how to build them? Or are you going to try and convey a way to solve a problem? Now, anytime you submit a CFP, you want to think about a way to solve a problem, convey that to the audience, and invoke some interest, invoke some sort of curiosity. So what that means is you have this particular topic you have to talk about, but how do you get that audience curious? How do you make it relevant to them? One of the best ways to do that is really to consider like some of the problem space or the use cases surrounding that topic, that domain, right? And I think it's extremely valuable when you think about it in that mindset, because now you can form your talk in the structure of, I have an introduction, I have a problem that I'm trying to solve, and I have a tease or a path to a solution without truly giving it away. Because what you don't want to do is in your abstract say, hey, I have a problem and here's a solution, and that's all, right? It's not compelling enough for folks to want to come to your talk. By the way, welcome, Tony. Thanks for coming up here. I hope you're also considering submitting a talk to KubeCon or some of the Colo events as well. Now, I will be honest, when I first started submitting CFPs years ago, like I'm talking about in my VMware days, I truly had no idea what I was doing. I just would write a topic and not really think about what the framing or who I was trying to convey this message towards. And so I would actually write a topic out and try and justify it. But quite honestly, that first round did not work. And when you think about that, hey, Jasmine, welcome to the show. And when you think about that, when you think about how you want to create a CFP, one of the things to consider is like look at the experts and see how they've done it. Now, when I first started submitting CFPs, let's say to KubeCon, which was like way back in like 2018 or 2019, somewhere around there, I got rejected. Like I honestly, one, had no skin in the game because I truly didn't understand what Kubernetes was. But two, I also didn't have a lot of speaking experience. And three, I also didn't know how to write a CFP properly. So when you combine those three, your likelihood of getting accepted is really low. And so you get that first rejection, and it's like, a huge gut punch. I don't know how to say it, right? It's a gut punch because it's like, oh my gosh, I thought I had an amazing talk. And then all of a sudden someone's like, nope, nope, not at all. Not at all. This is not a good talk at all. Sorry. But they say it in a nice way. They usually like give you your rejection email in the framing and the mindset of, oh, there's so many great submissions and it was very difficult to choose. And that's like a nice way of putting it as, yeah, thanks for your efforts, but there are a lot of other talks that were way better. And that's a reality because as you think about conferences like KubeCon or reInvent, a lot of these conferences are highly competitive. A lot of these conferences are highly competitive because there are so many excellent topics, there's so many excellent speakers that are out there. There's so many great stories that have to be told. At the same time, there are also a new set of speakers that don't get that opportunity, right? And so there's a few mindsets I'll provide for you over the next, I don't know, however long we hop on here. But I just want to say, welcome, Jason. Thank you for coming along. Yes, my setup is very simple. I have a Blue Yeti Nano, and I'm using AirPods from my headphones because I was trying to adjust the feedback and I didn't want anything coming into the live stream or any sort of echo coming into the live stream. But other than that, my camera, it's a 5-year-old Logitech Brio, fantastic quality. I don't know. I haven't found a good replacement for it yet. And that's it. I've got a TV in front of me. That's my monitor. That's why I get a little bit of that extra brightness because I choose the right background and it's like a bright background. Anyways, let's get back on track. So you want to submit a CFP, right? Let's talk about KubeCon for a second and let's review some of the CFP stuff. I'm going to discard changes. Let's go pull up. I'm going to present my screen. I don't have a slide. I don't use slides, especially with this. Okay, let's do a Chrome tab. Okay. Oh, Jason, no worries. I am actually not using OBS. I am paying for StreamYard, and I actually have the Pro version. And the reason I do this is because when I think about like how much time it takes to actually set up the right setup for your video streaming, it's like I've tinkered so much with it. There's a few people that do it really well, like Ramon, for example. He's done a great job of setting up his OBS, and he even open sourced his OBS setup too. So go check that out. All right, so let's take a look at KubeCon. Right, the CFP has been open for some time now, and quite honestly, if you're starting to think about it right now and you haven't thought about an idea yet, I would say maybe go for it. Right, the likelihood of you getting accepted, I don't know. It's because you're rushing it and you haven't really given it enough time to really think about what your idea should be about. But what I will say is that even though you have some time, if you're an excellent writer, if you've done this before, I think this should be a piece of cake. In fact, you might even be able to reuse one of your existing CFPs if you're already someone that submits talks. So specifically in KubeCon, right, there are so many different tracks. And these tracks help you navigate where your talk should fit. Right? I can't cover all these different tracks that show up here, but ideally I want y'all to see that when you think of a conference, there are tracks that your talk might fit really well into, and then other tracks that, you might think they might go well, but actually don't fit at all, right? So I'll give you an example. Now, I come from the networking background or networking space, And normally, if I'm thinking about submitting a networking talk, I might land here at networking edge and telco. Uh, Interestingly enough, if I was talking about service mesh, right, there is a dedicated track for service mesh. But the thing is, I view service mesh as a networking technology, right? So I would normally want to throw it in here as well. And that's just my thinking, right? And I would justify that through a number of ways. In any case, you want to think about the track you want to submit to. And I think KubeCon or the committee does a great job of breaking down each track and what they expect to see, in terms of themes, topics, technologies, OSS, cloud native, and it's very, very descriptive around what you should be focusing in on. Now, there's also some other considerations too. There are different kinds of formats for talks. So there's a standard session, right? A normal session is like you usually presenting some slides. I mean, it's not mandatory that you have to present slides, or you're presenting a demo or a combination of both. And that's usually about 35 minutes. But you have to think about that 35 minutes as what you really have as maybe 25 minutes. And the primary reason for that is you're actually spending 5 minutes setting context, introducing yourself, and introducing your credibility a little bit in some way. But you only have 25 minutes to actually convey your key ideas, because those last 5 minutes you want to allocate to engage the audience, to ask questions and whatnot. So 35 minutes is where a lot of people tend to land, because it's very easy to take an idea and deliver the concepts of it in 35 minutes. Now, you could also pair up with another person and co-deliver a talk. So there is more collaboration there, but there's also less load on one person having to figure it all out. Maybe someone's really good at making the demo, while the other person's really good at developing the talk track and maybe the content that would go behind it. Maybe it's a combination of the two. It honestly depends, and it really depends on who you know and how best you can work with them and figure out a way forward to co-submit. Now, the other thing though is that you could take that to another level and go down the panel route. I mean, maybe there are a few of you that have a common idea and have some common opinions, or even opposing opinions about a certain process, technology, way of doing things. And maybe it might be ideal to try and submit a panel around that. Right now, one piece of advice is, if you're considering a panel discussion, right, think deeply about your diversity. And what I mean by that is, if you have a panel full of men, your likelihood of it being rejected is extremely high, actually, because that's not true diversity, right? So you want to consider that you bring in multiple perspectives into that panel altogether. Panel discussions are great because it's more about authenticity, about like knowing your own craft, your own domain really well, and just like following the tune of what the moderator is going to feed your way in terms of questions and thought processes and whatnot. Now, on the other hand, maybe you're very courageous and you're the kind of person that can take a lot of content and cram it into 5 minutes and deliver a phenomenal overview of something within 5 minutes, right? You deliver a lot of value in 5 minutes. Maybe it's a lightning talk, right? And that lightning talk actually is really cool in a lot of ways, because I look at it like Twitter or X. If you don't have the subscription, I'm sorry that you can't comment on the stream if you're watching the stream on X. But also, if you don't have the subscription, you're kind of limited in characters in terms of how many things you can fit in a single tweet. And that's really cool, because conciseness is awesome. If you can take a message and make it as concise and digestible as possible, it's going to go a very long way. That is very much what a lightning talk is. Now, a lightning talk is also difficult to do because you have all these fantastic ideas that you want to convey, but you only have 5 minutes, and you have to decide, like, of all these ideas, like, what do you pick? Which one is the best? Which of the top 3 ideas can I convey in those 5 minutes? Right. And then you also have to structure your slides accordingly too, because sometimes they might be auto advancing. So you really only have like 15 seconds per slide and you have 20 slides. All right. I'm going to stop for a second and ask the audience, what questions do you have for me before I continue on about some more about the process and what should go into a CFP? And I will check both LinkedIn And YouTube, I don't see any questions coming in. I'll give you all a minute. Maybe scan my phone here and see if there's anything coming on this way. Okay. I am not getting questions at the moment. Let's carry on, right? Actually, I remember, I think it was Siddhant who asked a question on my original tweet somewhere. Siddhant, do you want to go back and bring that up perhaps? And then I could share it. Okay, let's continue on. So specifically around the KubeCon CFP, one of the considerations. Oh wait, there's one more thing. A tutorial. I talked about lightning talks. There's also tutorials. Tutorials are great because some people want to actually, put their fingers to the keyboards to test things out, try things out, learn something. Maybe they didn't know about something, and this might be their key to opening that door and figuring out a problem. And so workshops or tutorials are fantastic. It could be about anything. I mean, I submitted a workshop last year for KubeCon EU this year for networking, and it got accepted. And I showed up and with a co-speaker of mine, and we had approximately 500 people in that room, which is daunting. It's also very nerve-wracking, anxiety-inducing, because you don't want to mess up while you're presenting in front of all those folks, right? But in any case, tutorials are great because it's less about you trying to sell an idea and more about you educating that audience. Like, you want to literally educate an audience around why they should do this, around how they should do something, around a particular opinion or approach or a point of view. And it's important that people get to see this. So I'll talk about network foundations. I built the workshop with the mindset that people don't have the basics of networking to truly understand a lot of how Kubernetes works under the hood, or the mechanics behind it. And I took it from, let's understand, why networking, to the little bits and pieces that are relevant, like routing, DNS, HTTP, and even like load balancers and whatnot, and how that all relates to Kubernetes. But it was an incremental buildup to the point that people understood, or at the end of it, people would understand why we need all these different pieces, why DNS is critical for running inside of Kubernetes, and how like we actually move packets around in Kubernetes. Now, this all becomes important. And you could frame a workshop in that mindset too, or think about a very complex topic in the CNCF space and think about why it might not have been consumed as much. You could take that topic, break it down into some simple subtopics, and potentially have a workshop. Your workshop doesn't have to be long. It just has to be enough that people can be convinced that it would be valuable for them, right? Maybe you want to do a workshop that shows people how to work with app of apps in Argo. It's a suggestion, but you have to be a little bit more elaborate in terms of what the end goal or end game is there. But workshops are a great idea. Okay, so there is a question here from Ayush. This is the first time I will ever submit a CFP. I'm getting kind of overwhelmed after watching some talks from recent KubeCon. Which submission type is recommended considering I'm a beginner? So there are a lot of different ways you can approach this, right? I mean, there are different tracks in KubeCon. There are different Colo events within KubeCon as well. As a beginner, you also want to think about the fact that there are other beginners like you. What could you offer those other beginners? What do you have as an edge that you could offer these other beginners to help them along their journey? Maybe you know of a way to better understand how to use Docker alongside Kubernetes. Maybe you know how to perhaps work with TLS and certificates. Maybe you understand networking, or maybe you deeply understand the gateway API spec and you want to do a workshop around that. And maybe you consider yourself to be a beginner, but from other eyes or other points of view, you're not. You actually have domain expertise in a particular area. So I think you should consider the areas that you are strong in, right? And create beginner content for that. There's a beginner track. In fact, let's go take a look here. Somewhere down here, there is a section here which talks about the level in which you should pick. And actually, we should go to Sessionize and see that too. I'll show you that in a second. Now, there's a few levels that you can consider. You can consider any level, so like anyone can come in and anyone can consume this content. So it's very generic, not generic, but it's very generalized so that anyone at any depth, someone at a beginner level, someone at a deep level, should be able to hop in and understand what's going on. And then you have different levels. You have beginner, intermediate, and advanced or senior. Now, the beginner ones are like you would find around how to get started with Argo or how to use Flux or how to work with preview environments. And that might be beginner material, but intermediate might be, okay, you've already gotten past the phase of using preview environments or having to stand up one. Let's like do this in a multi-stage setup or something to that effect and have multiple preview environments and address the reason why someone might want this and address the reason why this is important for staging, for testing, for blue greens or canary deployments. That could be an intermediate talk. And an advanced talk might be, okay, we're taking our staging and preview to another level because now we need to enter this debugging phase to really accelerate the way we launch features into our apps. And some of our impediments is that all these bugs show up and we don't know a good mechanism on how to track them, right? This is an example, obviously very arbitrary, and it's not going to be very specific to what you're trying to do. But if you think back to the beginner section, right? If you think about that beginner track, there are a lot of people that might have something to gain from something that you have to teach them. So Ayush, consider that for a second. An introductory topic on something might be great. And you know what? Here's the other thing. KubeCon, Colo events, the reviewer team, they love to see new speakers because someone else might have already told the story before. That's okay. But someone else can tell that story in a different mindset, in a different perspective. So it's always worthwhile, telling your own version of it. All right. Welcome, Akansha. Thank you for coming by. We are 22 minutes in, and oh my gosh, I have only really answered one question and actually two questions, Jason's question and Aisha's question. All right, let's continue on and take a look at some of the other things. Yeah, all right. So there's some really important tips here. I even call this out. CNCF does not accept submissions with all male panels. I mean, I've called this out, and this is a given. You really have to think about the fact that we are moving heavily towards diversity in a lot of different ways. And, we cannot discount the fact we might have some really great speakers, right? But right? Remember, there's a couple of other things too, right? Avoid sales or marketing pitches. If it's your first time submitting a talk, what you don't want to be doing is going to your marketing team or going to some of your pitch decks about your product and then writing an abstract based off of that and submitting that, because that's not what KubeCon is about. KubeCon is not about marketing pitches. That's what the sponsor booths are for. That's where that stuff happens. That's where the sponsor talks come in. KubeCon and the talks that show up there are about the stories, about the failures, the challenges in building something, a platform, a network, the challenges in open source, the challenges of collaboration at times in, different time zones. That's what KubeCon is about. And to present and submit a marketing pitch is a disservice to KubeCon, in my opinion. So avoid that, right? Think deeply about your topic. Think about submitting something from the heart, something you want to tell. You want to convince people that what you say is going to change something about what they do in a positive way. That's how you want to frame it. There are some other rules to consider, right? You also cannot submit more than 2 submissions to KubeCon. There's a way around this in a way. And what that means is, okay, you have max 2 submissions total for KubeCon. That's okay. There's also the Colo events. You can take some of those talks or the talks you'd want to submit to KubeCon and submit them to the specific themed Colo events. And there's so many. In fact, if I highlight this, look, there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15 different Colo events. Oh, 15 different Colo events. There's so many opportunities for other places that you can submit. You know, a lot of people might gravitate towards KubeCon right away, but the Colo events are very powerful. We'll get to that in a second. Yeah, there's also another rule here. You can't have a total of more, you can't have more than 2 submissions, right? And that also includes 1 panel and 1 non-panel session. So be mindful of that. Pick and choose who you really want to submit with. So there's another question here. Siddhant asks, does the co-located events have a submission limit? I think artificially and in a hidden manner they do, but they don't have anything that's like out there. Like when you look at the CFP form or sessionize, there's nothing that says, oh, you have a max, submission limit of 2 or something like that, which is interesting because I was asking a few folks and they said that they were limited to certain certain Colo days to how many submissions they could do, like 2 or something. And I was a little caught off guard with that, but I think you can virtually submit unlimited submissions if you wanted to, although I don't recommend that because, it's just, now you're creating more work for a lot of the reviewers. But on the other hand, right, I mean, if you have 2 really good CFPs for KubeCon, which can also be reused for some of these Colo events, which is totally fine and acceptable. Although I would recommend you make them a little bit more tuned to that event as well if you're thinking about that. You could have a total of 4 submissions, right? And now you have a 1 in 4 chance of actually, probably making it in as a talk. But here's the other consideration too. Your CFP reviewers are going to see that. They're going to see how many talks you've submitted, and if it seems like you've oversubmitted, I don't know, maybe they might be inclined to start rejecting some of the other talks automatically if you already have some exception or some acceptances, I should say. Now, I don't think there's any rule about submitting so many. Just be mindful about it. You also don't want to get into the situation where you submit all these talks and then all of them get accepted. And now you have to decide which ones actually are the ones you're going to deliver on. Okay. So there's a couple of tips on writing a CFP, right? The tips are really around making sure that you have an abstract, you have a benefits to the ecosystem, and a proper session title. In the session title, you want to use title case. And what that means is every word and the first letter of every word in your title must be capitalized. So every first letter of every word just has to be capitalized. Easy enough. As odd as it sounds, even the and tos also need to be capitalized. Don't know why. I honestly don't truly understand the reasoning behind this, but I just follow that rule. Someone else might be able to weigh in about that. Okay. Now, the session description is interesting because this is where you are trying to sell the idea of your talk. You're trying to sell the value of it. It's not a sales pitch of the product. You're actually pitching to the reviewers why this talk is actually meaningful to the audience. Well, in a way, right? You're actually talking about the actual topic, the why, the how, the what, the solution, and the introduction. And in somewhere in there, it has to be convincing enough that someone would want to show up to that talk, right? Someone has to feel compelled to say, this might be a true way to solve this problem in my space. So that's part of it. But the other part of it is the benefits to the ecosystem. There's a lot of value in adding so much detail to the benefits to the ecosystem because it provides context around whether or not you are the right person to deliver this talk. If you've never worked in you've never touched Terraform, never worked with Terraform in your life, and you are the person that's submitting a CFP on Terraform, how to do X, Y, and Z in Terraform at scale with all these cloud providers, the CFP reviewers are going to look at that and be like, let's go take a look at this person's LinkedIn profile and see what they've done with Terraform in the past, right? So this is your opportunity to explain and showcase some of that work, because maybe they might not be able to find it. Now, the other side to this too, do you have any business about talking about Terraform if you were the sole, submitter? Probably not, right? And the likelihood of you getting accepted is probably going to be low. And that's just because the CFP reviewers aren't there to rip you apart. They just really literally have to think about the right content that comes into these talks, comes into KubeCon, and to think about, is this person the right person to deliver on this topic, and will it be impactful for the audience? So what that means is, as you're thinking about what you want to submit a talk about, you also need to have some domain expertise in that space as well. So in the benefits to the ecosystem, the other consideration is thinking deeply about who benefits from this. Okay, yes, there is an end user that's going to benefit from this, but think about the profound impact in open source to the ecosystem. Is your solution, is your idea only solving a very niche corner case, or is it actually creating a path to solve multiple other problems in open source, right? So there's so many ways to look at this. There's so many answers to this, but I highly recommend you think about how what you're going to be talking about impacts multiple audiences, multiple stakeholders in the ecosystem. And that's important too. Multiple users as well. Let's say you're talking about telemetry and observability and tracing. There might be more than one audience to that, and more than one audience to benefit from something like that, right? Maybe you're talking about instrumenting tracing inside of your code, but also doing it at the sidecar level if you're using a service mesh. And there are multiple people who will benefit from that story altogether. So don't ignore this section, right? This is the section where you justify your abstract. Now, there are other sections too when you're filling out your CFP form. These are just really relevant to the projects in the CNCF, and maybe even in just general open source that you're looking to showcase. So list them all out, right? Be as very specific as you need to be. If you're going to be talking about Argo and Kubernetes, well, it's implied that Git's going to be involved. It's implied that Docker or some container runtime is going to be involved. It's implied that you're going to be using some sort of rollout technology or some sort of staging technology or some proxy of some nature, right? List everything out. And the reason why that is because it gives the reviewers the mindset that you're actually thinking about multiple aspects of your own talk, and you're not just focused on that one thing. If you're going to talk about Istio, you're going to be talking about Envoy somewhere, or you're going to be mentioning it, or you're going to be demonstrating that Envoy is, a mechanism underneath Istio that helps this function. So, all right, how to give a great talk. Look, this one's hard. I'm not gonna visit this. I'm here to help you submit CFPs and think about ways you can increase your chances of submitting a CFP. Now, this is KubeCon. There's a lot of other stuff that you should probably go and take a look at. I'm going to stop and say, ask me anything. What kind of questions do you have for me? Siddhant, Akansha, if you're still around. Jason, if you're still hanging around, what kind of questions? And I'm just responding to some folks here on my phone. Okay. Let's take a look at the Colos for a second. Right. Now, I have some thoughts and tips around the Colo events. So I'm trying to think of the nicest way to put it. But when you think about a lot of these Colo events, there are some companies that tend to back these Colo events, some very influential companies. And before I continue, let me address Zidane's question. So Zidane's question is, how do you deal with the creative burnout? Sometimes there's a great idea, but hard to convert it into completing a CFP. So that's an interesting question, Siddhant, and I'm actually happy you asked that question because I think a lot of people suffer from the CFP burnout. I'll give you a bit of my thought process around how I think about CFPs. People may not agree with this, but my CFPs always start with the title. The title will actually change at some point, but the title gives me the original backstory or basis for what my talk actually should be about. My title will morph because once I start writing out the CFP, it starts to actually give me a better sense of what that title should be. But I have a general idea of what I want to convey in this talk, right? The harder part is actually writing out that CFP because there's so many different ideas that you have to consider. There's so many different ways to convey an idea. And then you also have a limited set of words and characters that you can use to convey that idea. Now, the burnout aspect of it is an interesting one because you have this great idea, right? And you just don't know how to convey that in words. You don't know how to convert that into something that someone would actually accept and say, hey, I want to sit in on the session. And the reality is, like, you've got the idea, you write it down, and then maybe write down some bullet points that help you just kind of formulate a thought process around what you're trying to convey. You got the idea, maybe a title, and now you've got 5 bullet points, and then you park that idea for a second, go do something else and come back to it maybe a few hours later, a day later, the next day, whatever it is. And the reason why is because you'll start to think about that a little bit differently with a fresh mindset. And now you also have an ability to write out that CFP in full. Like, you actually have an idea because you've given your brain an opportunity to really digest those bullet points you wrote down, stitch them together, come up with a problem, come up with a solution, come up with a statement, and then convert that into an abstract. That's what you've given your brain enough time to do. And that's why it can't happen, in an instant. You have to start with an idea and work from that point on. But then another way to deal with this is maybe collaborate with someone, maybe co-submit with someone. Because you have an idea, you cannot complete it. Someone else might be able to complete that idea for you and maybe even write out the abstract for you because they're able to understand where you're trying to go. They're aligned with you. They're on the same page. And maybe a co-submission might be in order, right? Might be the right way to go forward. So I will be honest. Every single CFP I'm submitting for KubeCon this year and Colo events, they're all with people. There isn't a single CFP I'm submitting by myself. And that's how I got around some of that creative burnout. Now, I will be honest, it's hard to pick and choose who the right person is for that CFP. And it takes a lot of alignment. It takes alignment in the sense of agreeing upon the same ideas, and then providing not only a single perspective, but multiple perspectives to be able to address the same set of problems with different solutions, right? You're providing one perspective and your co-speaker's providing the other. And I have to look at it that way too, because, that idea of trying to go very far alone actually is impossible. You actually tend to plateau yourself when you try to come up with all of these ideas. And I realized this last year. So I was trying to come up with some CFPs, and I kept getting hung up on like thoughts and different ways to handle this. And then I thought to myself, what if I paired up with someone? If I paired up with someone, we might have a different way to look at the same problem, and we could come up with a different talk track and a different approach altogether. And that just kind of snowballed to the point where I'm not going to admit this. I won't say this number out loud. I don't think people need to know how many CFPs I'm submitting this time around. A few people do know. But the way to get around that is to actually collaborate with others, maybe do a panel, right? And source the idea. Maybe even just get another pair of eyes on it and be upfront. Say, this is an idea that I wanted to kind of share with you, get your thoughts on, and see if there are ways that I can make it better, but I still want to submit it by myself, or maybe invite them to come submit it with you. There are different ways, but you have to open yourself up to be willing to do that too. And people are not going to steal your ideas. I promise you that. We're a lot better in cloud native for it. If someone shares an idea with me, I want to provide them feedback so that they can take that idea and become better. And I think we should all be doing that for each other. Okay, Akansha has a question here. Do you recommend submitting a CFP if that person has theoretical knowledge but no production experience on that particular stack? I have Slack on the brain because Slack is also in front of me at the moment. Yes, I do recommend it. The reason why that is because not everyone walking into that KubeCon session or Colo session is an expert, right? Not everyone's trying to use this in production. Some people are trying to learn. They're just trying to figure out, like, what's this new thing and why it's relevant to them. So KubeCon has to have a balance. Colos have to have a balance of the art of possible or impossible and the reality and pragmatism of how we do things in production. And if there isn't that balance, then all we end up doing is just an endless cycle or a vicious cycle of production issues that don't get fixed because we're not very innovative and thinking about other problems or allowing the space for other problems to be discovered or other solutions, interoperable solutions to be discovered, right? So I always think it's recommended to do theoretical talks as well. In fact, I've submitted theoretical talks. I don't have a lot of production Istio experience. I have some, but not a lot, right? And I think about that. So I will submit to Istio Day, but you're not going to find me submitting, let's do multi-cluster, multi-cloud Istio in production with all of the stitching and glue in between. That's not going to be my talk. I could talk about it theoretically from the lens of, why it's important from a business continuity and disaster recovery standpoint and all the stops in between. But to talk about it about, operational production systems, no, I leave that to the experts. I won't try to do that to myself. But regardless, Akansha, I do think that folks need to also submit theoretical talks as well. Okay, more questions. Keep them coming in. I will go as long as I need to. I mean, the only other thing I'm doing for the rest of the day and the weekend is CFP work. And in fact, maybe I'll pull up one of my older CFPs if I can find one. All right, let's talk about the Colo events. I love the Colo events a lot more than KubeCon. KubeCon's great. KubeCon's fantastic. I think a lot of the more prestigious talks make it there. And some of the best talks that have been, judged and got 10 out of 10s will usually make it there. But I find so much value in the Colo events, right? And why I find a lot of value in these Colo events is because they're so specific, right? They're so specific that these Colo events don't want you to talk about how to get started with Istio or how to get started with Kubeflow. They are there for us to explore the impossible. The reason why I say that is because I love Kubernetes on Edge Day a lot. I truly enjoy it. And Kubernetes on Edge Day allows me to revisit a lot of the things I used to do at VMware when I was working at VMware. For example, I was working on an edge compute project while it was under the SD-WAN business unit. And this involved Kubernetes. This involved ways we could use vSphere in a very lightweight sense, ways we can implement SD-WAN to create, a multi-fabric edge compute environment. Anyways, that takes a little bit of also some leadership buy-in for it to actually have legs and move. But when I saw Kubernetes on Edge Day, I felt like it was important to come back and talk about these stories and the things that people actually want to do at the edge because of latency concerns and issues around like having to put all of their workloads and data in data centers or centers of data versus spreading this out and actually doing some true distributed computing and whatnot. Now, Edge Day is a great one because you're allowed to talk about Kubernetes and Edge and IoT and so many different things. I'm not saying it's the easiest one to get into. I think it's the most coolest of them all, because you get to start thinking about ways you can build an edge cloud and tell that story in so many different ways, right? I love that one. Another one that I think is great, right, is CiliumCon. CiliumCon, and the fact that it's combined with eBPF Day is kind of interesting for this one. Uh, I'm not sure how this happened or why this happened. I do think that they should be separate, but that's just an opinion, because I've always felt that CiliumCon is specific to how we do networking in Kubernetes and beyond it and outside of it, right? And eBPF, right, is a great technology. It's, while it has its roots from early Linux to being able to do a variety of different things today, should have its own place or its own day, because there are different things going on with eBPF that don't necessarily involve the network. Now, I would normally want to submit a talk to this one only because I want to talk about network technologies a lot more. And I feel like some of the talks around networking resonate way more here than anywhere else, right? For example, I did a CiliumCon talk on BGP, and sure, my demo, like right at the very end, one last bit didn't work. Everything else did, but that one ping failed. That was okay. But the fact that people actually enjoyed that kind of conversation, talking about BGP, nerding out and geeking out with me about BGP, is why I'd want to go back and deliver at that one, right? So that's passion. That's actually caring about and being intentional about a particular conference. So it's not me going and talking about Cilium, what Cilium is. It's about how Cilium is used in other areas. So here's my tip for y'all, right? There are other conferences here, Platform Engineering Day, App Developer Con. It's not about the theme of the day. It's about how you've taken other things and used it for that theme of the day. And I feel like those talks have a higher likelihood of getting accepted at these Colo events. Here's an example of what I did with Edge Day. I talked about multi-cluster Istio at the edge in Amsterdam. The edge was the backdrop, right? Edge Kubernetes is the backdrop. But Istio was the forefront of the conversation. Service mesh, ambient mesh was the forefront of that conversation. And that's the kind of stuff these colos want to see. So, think about your colo events. Think about how you can provide multiple dimensions and make it about more than just the theme of the day. And your chances of getting to the colo events will be a lot higher. Right. And I also say this because the colo events are so much more focused and so much more immersive, because you have an audience of folks that actually care about that particular topic. But they're also a great place to be too, because it's not so overwhelming, but you still have about the same size of an audience that you would get at KubeCon. So shoot for the colos. All right. I see another question come up from Siddhant, and it's about, what are your thoughts about leadership kind of talks? Is that topic suitable for KubeCon, or would it be better for something like Open Source Summit? I think thought leadership talks do have their place. I personally haven't explored doing thought leadership talks at KubeCon, but I think there is a place for them, right? There are spots for them, and it really depends on what you want to talk about, right? What kind of thought leadership are you trying to convey to the audience? Where are you trying to take them? What are you leading them towards? What does it mean for them? How is it beneficial for them, right? They will make it to the colos and they will make it to KubeCon, but I normally see them show up as keynotes in some way, shape, or form or another, right? And the leadership talks too can also take the form of how you lead community. And I feel like there might be a contributor track or contributor summit track that I haven't really investigated too much about, and I really should look into it a little bit more. But the contributor summit, in my opinion, is where like that community stuff comes out a lot more. So you may want to take a look at that, Siddhant. All right. I am going to stop talking about this for a second, and let's just go take a look at the CFP form. So CFP, submit a proposal. Okay. So this is the CFP form, right? It's pretty straightforward. Sessionize, I'm sure a lot of you all are very familiar with. Shoot, I need to log in. Oh yeah, all right. You can't see my screen, so I can totally log in. Yeah, we're still seeing the same kind of setup here. It's all good. Okay. Let me reshare my screen. Present. Share screen. And let's look at this. All right. So right now what we have is, this is the KubeCon CFP page. There's also a separate one for the Colos so that you're not confused. But take a look at this, right? This event allows a maximum of 2 sessions. Now, what's really cool about Sessionize is you can always go back and pick some of your existing sessions, and you just have to select that flag, or you just build in your new one. But note here, you've got 1,000 characters that you're limited to. Your 1,000 characters is like hard set. If you go over that, it won't let you submit. So your job is to make your CFP as concise as possible to fit in 1,000 characters. 1,000 characters is fine, right? I mean, less is good too. I mean, as being concise as you possibly can is always good, but there might be details that you need to add in and make sure that you convey to make sure that the value or the impact of that talk makes it through, right? All right, so there's several different tracks. Like, how do you decide which is the right track for your talk? So I highly recommend that previous section around the talks, you go take a look and see the different tracks that are available, right? The different topics that are available, and understand best where that topic fits. Because while you might think that the security track might be the best fit for your talk around authorization or something around, baselining your security with observability tools, maybe it falls into observability instead, right? I'm using that as an example, but there might be better tracks for your talk. Sometimes the reviewers could potentially propose a better track for you where they still accept your talk, but say, hey, maybe it goes here instead of there. Now, here's where you select your session format. There are 4 kinds. I mean, you can see the different formats in the previous doc that I showed you, or the previous website that I showed you. And then there's the level, right? There are 4 different levels. Any means, assume any level. This should be consumable by anyone at any, career level or level of expertise, or you could be a lot more specific, right? And then the benefits to the ecosystem. Notice how there's no character limit here, right? I always feel that my benefits to the ecosystem has been written so much better than my abstract that it actually should be the abstract. But the reality is, because you have like a massive canvas here, you could say anything you feel you need to justify why that abstract is valuable and impactful, right? This is the selling point. And this actually gets showcased as part of the schedule, like when your talk is scheduled, so people get to see it too. I mean, the reviewers will see this stuff as well, and will make the necessary suggestions or provide the necessary feedback around it, internally, and then decide whether or not it's one that they'd want to accept. Is this a case study? Hint: case studies are very valuable, right? It's always great talking about technology and talking about how something can get done. But storytelling and talking about a real story, a real world story where a real problem was encountered and the different avenues that needed to be hit to solve that problem is a valuable talk, right? And you know what? You submit case studies with people who use the technology. So you might be a vendor, but that co-submitter should be a consumer of your technology, or a consumer of a technology. They're living and breathing the good and the bad of that technology, and they have a lot of things to say. Give them that platform and call it a case study. And there's a section here around, have you presented this talk before? If you have presented this talk before, how is it going to be different? Where did you present it, right? Where did you present it? How is it going to be different? The CNCF needs to see a couple of things. So if it's the exact same talk, and if it was only, displayed online, like you did deliver this talk through a webinar or something, you actually delivered it to a very limited audience, because even though many people will go back and see that, not many people get to directly, engage with you live or after the fact, right after your talk. And so it may be okay to submit this talk, right? It might be perfectly fine to submit a talk like this if you've already done it before, but just indicate to them how it's a little bit different, how it might be a tad bit different overall. So the only other thing to consider, right, is I mentioned previously that you want to include some CNCF software. So if you're using Kubernetes, if you're using Argo, if you're using Helm, list them all out. Istio, list them all out. And normally you would just look to the graduated sandbox or incubating projects as well. List any non-CNCF projects as well, if you need to. And then your additional resources, this is where you come in and drop in your blog posts, your tweet threads, your videos, your streams, any existing talks that you might have done that are very relevant to this, right? People want to see this. This is your backup. This is like this is your references. Right? This is how people can attest to some of your work and say, oh, I feel confident that Akansha is the right person to show up on stage and talk about Octeto's preview environments, as an example. There's another section here. If you're working for a company that's got plenty of cash and funds these things, this answer should be no, right? Because the folks that really need this are the folks that don't have a job right now, but have an excellent story to tell because of some of the things that they've done in the past. Or they have a company that is going through some funding issues, right? And this is better suited for them, right? Where their company says, no, we can't sponsor this right now. Budgets are tight. Well, this is where you check that box. Now, I'm not going to name companies because there are companies out there that I truly believe should be paying for their accepted speakers because of how much platform and space they consume in open source. I'm just not going to name them. But I do think that there are companies out there that should be funding travel for their speakers. I have some thoughts around this too. Are you submitting as the speaker, right? Now, think about this carefully, right? If this is coming from your own mind, your own heart and soul and whatnot, then this answer should be yes. If someone else is writing this for you, it's because you're an executive that has an executive assistant or someone that writes CFPs on behalf of you, and they do this for you. If you select no, right, and someone else is submitting on your behalf, there is some element of, a lack of authenticity there, right? This is just a personal opinion. I feel like CFP reviewers, I'm not sure what Akansha is typing, but I wish I could, answer your question there, Akansha. Yeah, some reviewers will look at that and be like, is this speaker in touch with what's going on here, or are they out of touch? And then here's your section to just add in some additional bits and pieces and say, look, hey, I want to, I have these requirements, I have these accessibility requirements. I also have this special need to have this particular thing at my talk, etc. Right? Maybe this is an area where you're telling some of the reviewers the additional value that you're providing in this talk. And then there's a bunch of other stuff too that you probably can go through, your socials, your titles, the company that you work at. Is it an end user company consuming this technology, or do you contribute to the open source technology, right? And in my case, Solo, we contribute to open source, so we're not an end user in any case. Your country of residence, this does weigh in, right? Because look, KubeCon EU, I am a North American speaker trying to present at a European conference. There's some concerns around sustainability, hopping on a plane, adding to the carbon footprint, and then considerations around, cost and budget and all of that stuff too. And, making sure that there's space for local speakers as well. Now, this shouldn't dissuade you or prevent you from submitting just because you might not be local to EU, because you probably have an amazing story to tell. I feel like I have amazing stories to tell, and that's why I will submit to KubeCon. I feel like if I collaborate with someone in EU, in the European Union, somewhere in Germany or Amsterdam or London or whoever, and we submit a talk together and it gets accepted, I feel like that's okay because, at the same time I'm giving them space, they're giving me space. We're learning from each other. We're collaborating. We're now sharing multiple perspectives. And I encourage this for other people too, right? Pair up with people that might be local to the event versus having two folks flying from North America to go deliver on that talk. There's some other things too. How you want to answer this is entirely up to you. And then you have a section for co-speakers. So that's how a CFP form will look like, right? Now, are you going to directly dump everything here? No. Open up a Word document or a Google Doc or a Notepad or Markdown file and add your stuff there. And then, tinker with it and then bring it back into this form. Okay, I'm going to stop. Any more questions? I've been going on for an hour now. I want to end with a couple of things. Thank you, Akansha. I appreciate the kind words. I hope this has been helpful for folks. Even if folks don't watch it live and they decide, they want to watch the recording afterwards, that is perfectly fine. I'm also going to share some tips from the community, right? So I'm going to share my screen again, and I'm going to share a tweet from Caslin. So there's some advice from Caslin. She says, the track you select indicates your audience. Frame your talk to target that audience. I 100% agree with that. If you think about it too, the technology space that you're talking in, the technology that you are talking about has to be relevant to the audience that you're delivering this talk to. So Caslin's on point, right? Make sure that you pick the right track. If it's a security-focused talk, it should be the security track. It shouldn't be cloud-native AI, or it shouldn't be networking. There are some elements of networking that show up in security and vice versa, but that track is going to be critically important. The description should talk about the benefits to the audience. The benefits should talk about why the audience wants those benefits. 100% on point, right? Your description should entice and compel the audience to come and listen. Those benefits really talk about the justification behind it, right? They really talk about why it matters to them, why it's relevant. This is literally getting into the science behind it. This is important to people. This is why it's important. These are the actual real world problems it's solving. So emphasize. You even have Ian Coldwater coming back in here and saying the same thing. Like, look, I strongly do not recommend putting NA under the benefits to the ecosystem section. You don't think your talk has any benefits. Okay, I'll take your word for it. That's on point, right? Think about that for a second. If you say not applicable, then the reviewers are going to think like your talk is not beneficial to anyone, right? So you literally want to justify it. So spend the time there. Make your abstract as concise as you possibly can, but spend the time justifying why your talk is relevant, why you're the best person to deliver that talk, and so forth. And let me switch to one more tab. I'm going to share Dim's tweet as well. So he actually created an internal set of tips, which I think y'all should screenshot or go find the actual tweet from Dim's. He's at Dim's, and you can find his tweet there. So the title should evoke interest. Correct, right? Clickbaity in such a way, but not so long that it becomes a mouthful. I've done long mouthful titles and they don't work, but it should be catchy enough and enough to convey an idea that, I'm going to click on this and read the abstract. Okay, that's the first part. That's the hook, right? That's the hook and the bait. You throw it into the water, and now you've baited some people into a conversation. Great. Now, what actually happens next is really about your abstract and how you convince people to come to your talk, right? as Dim says, it should be about open sourcey things, not commercial products. No marketing pitches, no sales pitches. Authors should be diverse. I agree. I mean, if you're having multiple speakers in a talk, they should be coming from different companies. Now, that isn't to say you can't have two people from the same company deliver a talk, because the other way to achieve that diversity is no two DevRels should be delivering the same talk or be in a talk together. Maybe you should have a DevRel and an engineer, or maybe you should have someone from field engineering and someone from engineering, or engineering and marketing, a combination, right? That gives different dimensions, even though it might be from the same company. I mostly agree with that. The author should be from different companies, and I do encourage it as well. But I also feel like sometimes two people from the same company have a story to tell as well. That fourth bullet point, should not repeat anything that was done already. I mostly agree with this. I do think that you should try to be unique in your talk, right? You could still bring up a topic that has been talked about in the past. And if you're giving your own take and perspective on it with your own set of solutions, you've done your research, the knowledge and information is up to date, then it's not going to be the same, right? It's not going to be a repeat, but it's an idea that you could work off of. That fifth one, that's a hard one, because everyone's trying to make their talk the most interesting and the most captivating. It's a hard one because it requires not only, something clickbaity inside of your abstract, but I think there needs to be a bit of personality that backs it, right? So if you think about the abstract and who wrote it, does that personality actually align with that person? Are they going to be that same personality on stage? And that fifth bullet point is a lot more than just interesting. The person should be interesting. Something should be behind that person in terms of what they've done, what they've accomplished, or what they're passionate about, right? That next one, talk about problems. I've said this time and time again. You have to talk about problems and how to overcome them. Your CFP should not be about, hey, what is service mesh do, and what are the key features. It should be about why service mesh is doing this in these particular scenarios and niche situations, and how it's solving problems. Talk about options and why you are advocating for whatever you are talking about. Agree. You have to have domain knowledge, but you also want to talk about areas that surround that domain as well. Your passion should come through the abstract, right? Funny is fine. Don't be too serious. I agree with that too. Don't be robotic or like a machine. Have some heart. Throw some edginess. Don't be offensive. Like, I don't want anyone to be offensive in their abstracts, but think of ways you can captivate people. Throw some of that charisma into that abstract, and make people feel like, oh damn, if I walk into this space or this talk, I'm gonna feel like I'm gonna gain something out of this, right? So do not underestimate the power of the benefits to the ecosystem. Yep, I 100% agree. Anyone that skips this, I feel like they're automatically going to get rejected. And I'm sorry, but I feel like you have to emphasize and justify why. In benefits, do call out how your talk will add value to the community knowledge base. Agreed, right? Your benefits should convey that, hey, I am building additional documentation or processes or ideas and ways to achieve a solution around something that hasn't been solved before, or an additional dimension to how to solve that problem, right? So 100% on that. Also call out different personas who you may be targeting in your talk and the value provided to each. Yes, agreed. So remember, your talk track that you pick is also your audience. So make sure that the talk that you're delivering is directed to the audience. You don't want to be showing up to a platform engineering day talk and talking to a bunch of platform engineers or SREs, but your talk is about, development with Go and building operators, and none of those folks actually care about, maybe they do care about building operators, but the talk itself doesn't fit because it was catered towards developers, folks who are deep into the weeds of building things. Don't do a vendor pitch. Agreed. Yep, we can smell it a mile away. I'm not a reviewer, right? I've seen enough CFPs. I've seen my own CFPs. I've seen other CFPs that you easily can tell a pitch from an actually authentic talk. Avoid acronym soup. Agree. If all I see is like just a bunch of 3-letter acronyms in your CFP and I can't stitch it together, it's not going to work for me. And talk about end users. Agreed. Don't talk about customers. The word customers, in a way, it sounds dirty because it feels like you're only there for the sake of selling your technology. But people are at the other end of your conversation who want to consume this technology. They are end users. They are the ones that are going to take this technology, try it out, test it out, come up with the problems, find the bugs, report them, and help you make your software better. But these are fantastic tips. Dims, if you're out there, I hope you are enjoying your Friday and enjoying your weekend. But thank you for dropping this, and Kazlin too, right? Thank you for sharing your tips. In any case, I'm done with these tips, but we've been going on for 71 minutes now. I just want to say, right, I'm going to wrap up now. Are there any last minute questions that want to come up, or any? Heck, if you want to come up on stage, even, you are more than welcome to. Hello, Pratyush. Welcome, welcome. Joining rather late here, but that's okay. It's not late. It's actually midday for me, so that's totally fine. So, I know some of you are still around. Why don't you tell me what is the one event that you want to submit to? What's the CFP that you want to write? I'm going to pick on all of you. Just drop it in the chat. I know there's a little bit of a delay. That's okay. But I want to hear what you want to talk about at KubeCon or the Colo events. And maybe I'll give you some tips right now. Last minute tips, last minute thought processes. Okay, actually, so there's a question that came in from Ram Iyengar, who actually isn't in the YouTube stream, and unfortunately, because of the way Twitter is, I'll answer this for Ram. And Ram asked this a while back. I'm so sorry. What's a good balance of technical depth versus non-technical stuff to plan for a talk abstract? So the good balance is thinking about your audience, right? And aligning that to the level that you plan on submitting that talk to. So if you're going to submit a beginner level talk, your technical level should be enough that people get to see. It's like a show and tell situation. Maybe there's a demo. Maybe you're showing a little bit of your Git repo. Maybe you're showing your terminal, and that's okay. It's introductory, but you also don't want to overwhelm your audience, because if you start jumping around, your audience might get lost and they may not feel like they're deriving value out of this. So I feel like there's a few ways you can approach this. You can always set context up front by presenting them slides and then ending with a demo, or ending with a walkthrough of a repo, or even just walking through some screenshots of something. And you want to incrementally work up to that. But you also want to make sure that as you've worked up to these technical ideas, you also bring this back down to an Eli 5, like explain like I'm 5, right? Now, how you come up with that technical content, where you come up with it, how much of it you do is going to be entirely dependent on you. You could do a full talk that's entirely a demo, and it doesn't even have to be overly technical. You could just be very simply saying, hey, I'm going to enumerate all my workloads that exist inside of my Kubernetes environment. You can even take that same statement and make it super technical and say, these are all the containers and pods that are running inside of this namespace inside of my Kubernetes cluster that's running in US East 2 or something like that. And you might have lost like half the audience, right? But it's just the way you deliver it. And really that comes back down to how much you practiced it and you're thinking about it. Let me see if there are any other questions, because some just showed up on Twitter. So Siddhant is thinking about a workshop on open tofu. That's a good idea. In fact, I think these kinds of workshops with a lot of the misinformation, maybe misinformation is not a good word. I apologize. I'm not going to use that word. With a lot of discussions going on out there around what's going on with Terraform, HashiCorp, and Open Tofu, it's always good to create a path forward and let people know, okay, well, I'll create some clarity for you, and that's probably a way you can consider it. I love it, Siddhant. Go for it. Pratish has a question. What are the points reviewers consider when reviewing a CFP? Don't know if you already covered it or not. Actually, I'm glad you asked that question, Pratish, because let me show you. There is a chart that is used. Here, actually, let's go revisit. There's some really important resources that I feel. This is going on way longer than I thought, and that's okay. I'm good with this because I want to make sure people have the knowledge, so that even if they're not submitting for KubeCon, there's still a lot of time left for the Colo events. You still have over a week left. So, do you see this one link here, right? Inclusive naming initiative. This is important because in the inclusive naming initiative, you don't want to be very harmful, right? You don't want to be using words like blacklist or whitelist. You don't want to be using master slave, right? And I'm saying these words because we shouldn't be using them in any of our abstracts. There are better words. In fact, you can go take a look at the word lists. I strongly recommend everyone review this as they're submitting CFPs, because you allow yourself to remove any sort of unintentional harm that might get conveyed in your CFP. I know none of you are actually intentionally harming anyone here, or are out to intentionally harm anyone, but you can make your CFP better by using this inclusive naming initiative. Let's go back to the other tab, right? So there's that. There's the title case that I already recommended. So let's enter a title. How to make the best chocolate chip cookies. Chocolate chip cookies. Convert. And the title case for that is, I don't even know where the hell it went. Oh, here we go. How to make the best chocolate chip cookies. So for some reason, I don't know why it didn't do this. Maybe it just doesn't do for some reason. Maybe it just skips but that's title case. And I think if anyone just used this tool, you could literally just save yourself a hell of a lot of time. Let's go back. And there was one more thing I wanted to show you. Take a look at this, getting over imposter syndrome. Just make sure you check that out and you feel good about it, because it helps you understand what your thought process should be when you're giving a talk versus submit one. Okay, here it is. Submission reviewer guidelines. You want to win. You actually want to actually win at KubeCon. I don't have the answers. I don't have the answers for winning it. But if you truly review all of this, right? If you review how they evaluate and mark and grade a CFP, this is a long guide. This is your guide to making sure you have the best CFP, right? Granted, you might have the best CFP out there. Remember, your profile also matters too. If you have no profile, no one can find you on the internet. No one can find who you are. Despite you having a good CFP, sure, you've done half the job. The other part of that job is building that profile. Make sure people can find you, right? Make sure people can find things that you've done, because they're like compelled by this amazing CFP, but they cannot find out who this person is. On the flip side, some people do, like make terrible CFPs, but they have an amazing profile. And why they make terrible CFPs, who knows? Maybe someone wrote the CFP for them. Maybe they just weren't thinking about it. They didn't put a lot of effort in it, but they have like a great portfolio of talks that they've done. But this is the link. This is it, right? Go here, submission reviewer guidelines. Go check it out. This is literally the the true end-to-end guide on how to truly know if your CFP is going to make it, if your CFP is adequate, if your CFP hits all the criteria for what a reviewer expects to get you that higher rating on that talk. Okay, so there's another question from Pratyush. Pratyush, I already covered this once before, so you may want to go back and take a look at the video earlier on. But the benefits to the ecosystem is why you're justifying why you are the right person to deliver this talk. And then you're also justifying why this talk is extremely important to the community, the audience that shows up, and what actual problems you're aiming to solve and the perspectives and dimensions you're offering up. All right. This has been an 81-minute stream. This has been going on for quite some time now. Interestingly enough, one of my co-speakers has added some comments into one of our CFPs that we plan on submitting. I may need to go take a look at that momentarily. All right, I'm going to take one last peek at Twitter. I'm going to take one last peek at LinkedIn. I'm going to see. Okay, it doesn't seem like I have anything else here. Oh, can I please share the reviewer? Yes, absolutely. This is fun. So I can only share it to YouTube, and so that's where I see you right now. So it's in YouTube if you want to go pick that up, but I'll also drop it here. You know what? I'll make this one better for you. Let's turn this into a bit.ly, and then you can all copy it. Oh, dang. Actually, bit.ly is not going to work for me. I'll use tiny URL. Tiny URL shorteners are fun. There we go. Now that should help give you some good guidance as to how to make sure your CFP is good or better. I am closing off for doing any sort of CFP reviews now. I've got my own CFPs that I've got to write, and I probably will go to the community to help get some of them reviewed. But in any case, I don't see any more questions coming in. So that's a good sign, but I hope that this has been extremely helpful for y'all. And I wish you all the best of luck with your KubeCon and Colo CFPs. I know, and I do understand that it's always a competitive process, and I always do encourage folks to also think about some of the smaller ones, like the DevOps days or the KCDs. The KCDs and the Kube days tend to follow a very similar format to submission at KubeCon and the Colos. But also aren't as heavily competitive. So you have a better shot, especially if you're more local to the event. So I do recommend checking those out. But again, I do hope you all enjoyed this live stream. I hope I answered as many questions as I possibly can about CFPs and what to think about as you're developing it. Feel free to reach out to me if you have any thoughts or feedback about this one particular live stream. And also let me know, if you submit a talk, and let me know if you got accepted. I'd love to see you at KubeCon next year in Paris. I'm really excited. I'm hoping I get to go there. I'm in the same boat. I got to get accepted before I can make it out there. But I hope to see you all there to, chow down on some of those croissants and catch up with all of y'all. So, yep. All right. Happy Friday. Take care, everyone. We'll see you soon.